Tycoon enters Café, sees ex-wife working, holding a baby that looks just like him. Daniel Wu stepped out of his black luxury car, a driver waiting silently at the curb. The air was cool, laced with the scent of wet asphalt. He tugged at the collar of his tailored coat as he glanced at the small cafe tucked between two buildings. Willow Brew, the sign read in soft, faded lettering. He wasn't supposed to be here. This part of town was far beneath the elite circles he now moved in. He was supposed to be across the bridge, finalizing a billion-dollar acquisition. But something he couldn't explain what had led him here. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was fate. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft chime as he stepped inside. It was warm, the lighting dim but cozy. The smell of fresh pastries and coffee filled the space like a gentle embrace. There were only a few customers scattered around, quietly sipping from steaming cups, lost in their own worlds. Daniel approached the counter, reaching into his coat pocket for his phone to check a message when he heard a soft, familiar voice behind the counter. "Welcome to Willow Brew. What can I?" He froze. The phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. She stood there. Yeah, his ex-wife. Her hair was tied back loosely, tendrils escaping around her face. She wore a faded apron over a cream-colored sweater, her hands wrapped protectively around a small baby cradled against her chest. And when Daniel looked at the child, his heart stopped. The baby, he had his eyes. That same deep brown, the shape unmistakable. It was like looking into a mirror of his own past. Leah's smile died the moment their eyes met. Her lips parted slightly, caught between a breath and a memory. Daniel stared, stunned. The sound of the cafe fading into a vacuum of disbelief. The weight of time fell between them like a wall built from years of silence and regret. "Daniel?" she whispered. His voice failed him. His chest tightened as if the air had turned to stone. It had been almost 4 years since they'd last seen each other. For years since that fight, that last slammed door, that last word thrown like a blade. Selfish. He had buried her face in the depths of his past. He had tried. But nothing, no business deal, no high-rise office, no lavish gala, had ever fully erased her. And now she stood in front of him again, holding what could only be his son. "Leah," he finally said, his voice low and rough, like it had been torn from his throat. What is this?" She glanced around, tension building in her jaw. Her arms instinctively curled tighter around the baby, whose little hand clung to her sweater. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Daniel blinked, confused, breathless. "That baby, is he? Your coffee, sir?" Another barista interjected, oblivious to the storm brewing between them. Leah turned her back to him quickly, her hands trembling as she reached for a glass on the counter. "You should go, Daniel," she said without looking at him. "There's nothing for you here." But he stepped closer, not angrily, just lost, like a man suddenly dropped into the middle of a memory he never knew he needed to relive. "Is he mine?" he asked, not accusing, not demanding, just broken. Leah closed her eyes. For a second, she didn't breathe. Then she slowly turned around, tears already forming in the corners of her eyes, but she held them back. "No," she said, a single word, a lie wrapped in agony. Daniel's face changed. Confusion gave way to something darker. Pain, suspicion, an ache that spread across his chest like fire. But he didn't push. He didn't yell. He just nodded once, slowly, and took a step back. "I see," he said softly. "Then I'll leave you to it." He turned to go, his mind spinning. His hand reached for the door. But then he hesitated. He looked back. The child had turned his face toward Daniel now. Eyes wide, innocent, identical to his. And in that moment, Daniel's heart betrayed everything he thought he knew. Because for the first time in years, he felt alive. Not powerful, not successful, but painfully, undeniably human. He walked out into the rain again, letting it soak through his coat. He didn't even open his umbrella. Inside the cafe, Leah finally let the tears fall as she rocked her child gently against her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby. I wasn't ready to let him in. Not yet. His eyes. Daniel pulled over into a dark side street, barely aware of where he was. The engine hummed quietly as his fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. His heart raced, but his mind felt slow, like trying to walk through water. He stared ahead into nothing, until a memory crashed through him with the weight of a flood. He was younger, poorer then. Not yet the CEO of Wu International. Just a dreamer with ambition and not enough time. Leah had met him in the university library. She was studying literature. He was drowning in economics textbooks and pressure from a father who had never loved him unless numbers were involved. But Leah had smiled at him with warmth, with patience. She never cared about money or power. She believed in love, in late-night ramen, in handwritten letters slipped under doors. She was sunshine in a world that only offered him cold steel. And he loved her. God, how he had loved her. But then came the choices, the long hours, the sleepless nights building his first company, the deals that pulled him further and further from her side. One night stood out more than the rest. He'd returned home after a 72-hour stretch of meetings, red-eyed and empty. Leah had been sitting on the couch, clutching a small envelope in her hands. He remembered her face, torn between fear and hope. I'm pregnant, she said. He had stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. You're what? He asked, almost breathless. I found out yesterday. I was waiting for the right moment. I thought maybe it could be the one good thing to bring us back together. Daniel had said nothing for too long. When he finally did, it was the wrong thing. I can't do this right now, he whispered. Not with the company at this stage. Leah's smile faded. I'm not asking you to stop everything, Daniel. I'm just asking you to care. He had looked away, unable to respond. Not because he didn't care, but because he was terrified. Of being a father. Of being distracted. A failure. She'd stood up, her voice shaking. If I have to choose between this baby and waiting for you to finally show up for us, then I already know the answer. He hadn't stopped her that night. He didn't chase after her. He told himself he would, when things settled, when he had time. But time had passed and she disappeared. He always assumed she had gone through with what she hinted at, that she hadn't kept the baby. And in the echo chamber of his pride, he convinced himself it was better that way. Now he knew the truth. Daniel returned to his penthouse, where everything gleamed and echoed in silence. He walked through the vast living room, past untouched furniture and a kitchen no one cooked in, to his study. He stood in front of the glass wall overlooking the city. Lights shimmered below like stars, but all he saw were Leah's eyes filled with quiet pain, and the baby. He opened the drawer in his desk slowly, pulled out a photograph. It was old, a little worn. Leah sitting on a picnic blanket, smiling up at him, wind in her hair. That day had been perfect. They'd laughed for hours. He had almost proposed that afternoon. Instead, he postponed it for a conference call. He sank into the leather chair and pressed the photo to his chest. I was supposed to be there, he whispered to the empty room. I should have been there. But guilt wasn't what hurt most. It was the realization that he'd lost something irreplaceable. Not just years, but memories. First steps. First words. Laughter. Cries. All of it stolen by his own ambition. He stood up abruptly, as if trying to escape his own skin, and picked up his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Hello? The voice answered hesitantly. Mrs. Han. It's Daniel. There was silence on the other end. I need to know where she's been all these years. The voice trembled. She asked us not to tell you. After she left, we... Please, he said, and his voice cracked. She has my child. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. There was a pause, then a sigh, then, slowly, the voice relented. She stayed in Incheon. She worked in bookstores, cafes, whatever she could find. She didn't ask us for anything, not even when she was sick after giving birth. Daniel clenched his jaw, his eyes burning. You left her, the voice said bitterly. We begged her to stay, to fight harder. But she said it would be more painful to hold on to someone who already let go. He swallowed hard. And the baby? She named him Minjun. He's beautiful. Just like you. Daniel's heart dropped. When the call ended, he stood there, holding the phone to his chest, just like he had with the photograph, as if trying to keep together the broken pieces of himself. Outside, the rain began to ease, just enough for the city lights to reflect off the wet pavement like 1,000 tiny hopes blinking through the dark. He stood by the window of his dark penthouse, watching the city flicker beneath him like an ocean of ghosts. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, heavy and unmoving, like the weight in his chest. He thought of Minjun's tiny hands, the way Leah had cradled him like the most fragile thing in the world, their child. The next morning, Daniel didn't go to the office. He didn't call his assistant. He didn't respond to the flood of texts asking where he was. For the first time in years, the empire could wait. He was going to find the truth. He found himself outside a modest brick building in a quiet neighborhood, far from the heart of the city where glass towers stretched into the sky. He hadn't been here in years. The paint on the gate was peeling. The garden was overgrown. But it was still the same house, Leah's parents' house. He hesitated, hand hovering in the air before he rang the bell. A long pause. Then the door creaked open. Her mother stood there, older, thinner, gray now streaking her dark hair. The moment she saw him, her lips parted in surprise, and something close to fury. "You have some nerve," she said, voice cold and quiet. "I know," Daniel said, his tone low. "But I need to talk to you. Please." There was a long silence. She didn't move. Then her gaze softened, barely. She stepped aside. He entered the house that once held laughter, dinners, quiet family evenings. Now it felt distant, filled with silence too sharp to ignore. They sat across from each other in the living room, separated by years of pain. "I didn't know about the baby," he said first. "Not until yesterday." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "And if you had, would it have changed anything? Would you have shown up at her door then? Held her hand in the delivery room? Or would you have thrown money at the problem like you always did?" "I would have been there," he said quietly. "No," she said, voice breaking. "You had your chance, Daniel." He looked down at his hands, suddenly unsure of himself. "Why didn't she tell me?" She exhaled, tears pricking her eyes. "Because she didn't want to see you make that face." Daniel lifted his eyes. "She didn't want to beg for your love. She didn't want to raise your child while watching you chase another ambition. She thought, if you couldn't choose her when she needed you, you'd never choose her for the right reasons." Daniel swallowed hard. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "Too many. But I thought there would always be time." "She cried for weeks after she left you," her mother whispered. "She was scared, alone. And when she came here, she wasn't asking for comfort. She just wanted a roof over her head. We tried to make her stay, but when the neighbors started whispering, and your name kept coming up, she packed up one night and left. Pregnant. Sick, but proud." A long silence filled the room. Daniel could barely breathe. "Where did she go?" he asked. "She didn't want you to find her," her mother said. "But I suppose now that you've seen Minjun, you won't stop until you do." Daniel nodded. "No, I won't." She finally sighed, long and resigned, as if giving up a secret she'd sworn to protect. "She lives near the Han River now, small apartment above a bakery. She works double shifts at the café during the week." He stood, but she held up a hand. "Don't you dare hurt her again." "I won't," he said, his voice hoarse. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Leaves rustled along the sidewalks. The world felt on edge, like something important was about to unfold. Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the house, remembering the last time he had been there. A birthday dinner. Leah had baked him a cake herself. He had taken a call during dessert. She never said anything, but he remembered her quiet eyes watching him. Always watching, always waiting. He hated himself for it now. He drove across town, his grip on the wheel tight, his jaw clenched. When he arrived outside the bakery, he didn't go in right away. He watched from across the street as customers trickled in and out. Then, like fate refusing to delay any longer, she appeared in the window. Yeah. She wore a pale blue apron, her hair tied up again, tendrils framing her tired but lovely face. She held Minjun in one arm as she cleaned a nearby table with the other. She looked exhausted, but there was a quiet grace to her movements, the grace of someone who had been through fire and emerged standing. Daniel's chest ached just looking at her. Then it happened. Minjun, nestled in her arms, turned toward the window and locked eyes with Daniel across the street. It was instant. The recognition, the way his expression shifted. Curious, then unsure, then a small, quiet smile. Lia followed the baby's gaze, turned toward the window, and froze. She didn't move for several seconds. The cloth in her hand dropped. Her fingers curled around her son instinctively. Daniel crossed the street slowly. This time, he wasn't walking in as a tycoon, not as a CEO, just a man who had lost too much, a man trying to find a way back to something real. She met him outside the door, blocking the entrance. The baby shifted in her arms, but she held him firmly. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but shaking. "I needed to see you." "You already did." "Lia, please, just a moment." She didn't answer, but her eyes were stormy, filled with emotions she had buried too long. He looked at the baby. "I went to your mother's house. I needed to understand." "You had your chance to understand," she said sharply. "Years ago." "I know," he whispered, "but I was blind. I thought I had time. I didn't know I'd be walking into a cafe one day and find the life I threw away standing right in front of me." Leah's lip trembled. "You don't get to show up now and want it all back." "I don't want it all back," he said. "I want to earn it, day by day, whatever it takes." She looked down at Minjun, who was now sucking on his fingers, content. She leaned her cheek lightly against his head, as if shielding him from Daniel's words. "You're not ready to be a father," she whispered. "You weren't then, and I'm not sure you are now." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I know what it feels like to live without him, and without you, and that fear is worse than anything else." The wind tugged at her apron. The baby blinked sleepily, his face a perfect mix of both of them. She met Daniel's eyes again, and for a heartbeat, there was silence. The city disappeared. Only their breath. Only the question lingering in the air. Would she let him in? She stepped aside. "Just a little. 5 minutes," she said. "Nothing more." Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. Only a young couple in the corner remained, whispering over coffee, and an old man flipping through a newspaper near the window. The soft jazz music playing through the speakers seemed too delicate for the silence that had settled between them. Lia moved behind the counter with slow, mechanical grace, placing Minjun in a wooden baby seat behind the register. The baby cooed softly, playing with a colorful ring toy, blissfully unaware of the storm hanging in the air between his mother and the man now standing awkwardly in front of her. Daniel didn't sit. He stood there, shoulders heavy with 100 things he wanted to say and no idea how to say any of them. "You have 5 minutes," Lia reminded him, tying her apron again, her back to him. "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "You don't have to speak slowly, Daniel. I'm not looking for a poetic apology. I'm not here to rehearse lines," he replied, a bitter smile touching his lips. "God knows I've spent my whole life rehearsing for meetings, for investors. But I never prepared for this." She finally turned, arms crossed, leaning lightly against the counter. Her eyes were unreadable, guarded. But he knew those eyes. He remembered when they used to shine with laughter. Now they looked like a locked room. "I thought you'd hate me," Daniel said. "I thought you'd yell or slap me or scream. But this silence, it's worse. Hate burns out eventually," she said, her voice brittle. "I moved past hate a long time ago. It wasn't worth the energy when I had a baby who needed feeding, diapers, warmth, sleep, medicine." Her voice cracked, just a little, and she looked away quickly, pretending to adjust a napkin holder. Daniel stepped closer. "You shouldn't have had to do that alone." "No," she agreed. "But I did. Because that's what being a mother means. You survive no matter what." He swallowed hard. "I never stopped loving you." She gave a bitter laugh. "You didn't even call." "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know?" she snapped, eyes flashing. "That's the truth, isn't it? You buried me in your past like I was a distraction. Something that didn't fit your plan." Daniel stood still, letting the words hit him like a wave. "I told myself you needed space, that you were under pressure, that you'd come around. But you didn't. You built your empire, made the front page of every magazine, and forgot about the woman who sat alone in a bathroom holding a pregnancy test at 3 a.m. Leah's voice broke then, and her hand trembled slightly as she pressed it to her chest. "I waited for you," she whispered. "Every single night. I waited." The weight of her words pressed down on Daniel's chest like a stone. "I was a coward," he admitted, barely able to speak. "I thought I was choosing stability. I thought if I succeeded, I could come back to you with something to offer. But I lost you in the process. I lost everything that mattered." She didn't speak, just watched him, her eyes glistening, her lip trembling. "And then I walked into that cafe," he continued, his voice thick. "And I saw you holding him, and I didn't know how to breathe." Leah looked at Minjun, who now yawned softly, his head resting on the edge of the baby seat. "I was scared too," she said finally. "Not just of raising him alone, but of what it meant if you ever came back. What if you came just to claim him? What if you showed up only out of guilt? Or worse, pity?" "I'm not here out of pity," Daniel said quickly, stepping forward. "I'm here because when I saw him, when I looked into his eyes, I saw a version of myself I forgot ever existed. And I saw you, and I knew, in that one instant, that nothing else I've done, no company, no fortune, has ever meant anything." Tears slipped silently down Leah's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She stared at him, vulnerable and strong all at once. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A photograph, worn, creased, edges frayed. He handed it to her. She took it slowly, her breath hitched. It was the photo from that day in the park. Her laughing, looking up at the camera, sunlight catching in her hair. She had no idea he still had it, that he carried it with him. "I keep this in my desk," he said. "It's the only real thing I've had with me for years. Every time I wanted to call you, I'd take it out, and then I'd freeze, because I thought I didn't deserve to speak to you again." Leah held the photo close to her chest. Daniel stepped back slightly, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to take him from you. I don't want to undo what you've built. I want a chance to be near him, to learn how to be his father, even if that means starting as a stranger." Her eyes searched his. For what, he wasn't sure. Maybe sincerity, maybe regret, maybe hope. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I'm not asking you to trust me right now. I'm asking you to let me try to become someone worth trusting." A long silence passed between them. Outside, the sky had begun to shift, gray giving way to a faint touch of gold. The day was moving forward, and with it, something else was slowly thawing between them. Leah looked at her son. "He likes to be held after he eats," she said quietly. "He hates loud noises. He sleeps best when someone hums." Daniel felt something flutter inside him. Small, fragile, but powerful. "I'd like to learn his lullaby," he said. Leah nodded, just once, and walked over to Minjun. She picked him up, held him close, then looked back at Daniel. "He's never met another man," she said. "He doesn't know what a father is. Don't confuse him unless you're sure you'll stay." Daniel stepped forward and gently placed his hand on Minjun's back. The baby didn't flinch. He turned slightly, eyes sleepy but calm. "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel whispered. "Not again." Minjun shifted in Leah's arms, looked up at Daniel with curious eyes, wide, round, soft brown. Those same eyes that Daniel had seen in the mirror his whole life, and yet, Somehow, on this tiny face, they looked different. More innocent. More real. He'd seen his own features countless times, printed in business magazines, reflected in mirrored elevator walls, sculpted in the confidence he wore like armor. But never like this. Never as a fragile, living echo. The baby blinked slowly, then let out a tiny sigh as he laid his head against Leah's shoulder. "He trusts easily," Leah said softly, as though afraid to say it too loud. "That scares me. I don't want him to trust the wrong people. I've spent every day teaching him the world is safe, because I've had to be that safety." Daniel's fingers twitched as if he wanted to reach for Minjun but didn't dare. His voice trembled when he finally replied, "I was never safe for you. I see that now." Leah didn't answer. She gently rocked the baby as he drifted off to sleep, the weight of him drawing her down to the nearest booth. She sat carefully, cradling Minjun with one arm, the other stroking his tiny back. Daniel hesitated, then slid into the booth across from her. It was surreal, sitting in this modest cafe booth. No boardroom, no sleek marble table between them, no contracts or pretense. Just wood grain, soft lighting, and a fragile silence they didn't know how to break. "I missed all of this," Daniel said after a long pause, watching the way Minjun's fingers curled into the fabric of Leah's apron. His first smile, his first word was ball, she said quietly, eyes still on the baby. "It was during the World Cup. I left the TV on, and he kept pointing and saying, 'Baw.' I cried for an hour afterward." Daniel's smile was full of ache. "I wish I'd been there." She looked up. "You weren't." He nodded. "I know, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Leah studied him for a moment. Something about the way he said it, no excuses, no smooth detours, made her eyes soften, if only slightly. Daniel looked around the cafe, trying to ground himself. It was small, cozy. A couple of children's drawings were pinned to a bulletin board near the kitchen. One of them, he realized with a jolt, had a stick-figure family. A woman, a child, and a blank space where another figure had been erased. He swallowed hard. "Did he ever ask?" he whispered. Leah followed his gaze and immediately looked down. "Sometimes. I told him we were a small team, that some families are just different. And when he's older, I'll tell him what I've always told him, the truth, that he was wanted, that he was loved, that I never stopped fighting for him." Daniel stared at the erased space in the drawing, something twisting in his chest. "And what if I want to start fighting for him too? You can't just show up and pick up where I've bled," she replied, her voice trembling but steady. "You don't know his routines. You don't know his fears, or his favorite storybook, or how he cries when he wakes up from a nap too soon. I want to learn. And if he cries when you leave one day, if you disappear again, what will I tell him then?" Daniel closed his eyes, breathing in deep, feeling the sting behind them. "I left once," he said, his voice rough, "but it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I didn't know how to be anything other than what the world expected from me. I thought I had to prove something before I could deserve you. You didn't have to be rich," she said quietly. "You just had to show up." The words sliced him. They weren't bitter, just honest, and they hurt more because of it. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know what fatherhood is supposed to feel like. I don't have an example. My dad was a ghost in a suit who only noticed me when I disappointed him." Leah's eyes softened even more, and her voice gentled. "Then be what he wasn't. Don't try to be perfect. Just be present." They both looked down at the baby. His chest rose and fell steadily, his tiny mouth slightly parted, completely at peace in his mother's arms. "He sleeps so deeply," Daniel murmured. "It took a long time," she said. "He was colicky. He used to cry for hours. I tried everything, warm baths, singing, rocking him, but nothing worked until I started humming." "What did you hum?" She paused, and then, almost shyly, she hummed a few bars of a familiar tune. A lullaby, simple, gentle, familiar to any child. Daniel smiled through the wetness in his eyes. "You used to hum that to me." when I couldn't sleep after bad meetings. I remember, she said, still humming softly. You'd come home and lie on my lap and pretend you weren't exhausted. I wasn't pretending, he murmured. I was just scared to admit how much I needed you. They sat there for a long time. Leah humming, Daniel listening, the baby dreaming. The cafe had grown quiet again. The world outside moved on, but in this tiny corner of the city, the clock seemed to pause. Two broken hearts slowly, tentatively feeling out the rhythm of something they once had, and maybe could have again. Finally, Leah broke the silence. I'm not saying yes, Daniel. He nodded. I know. I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not asking you to. Not yet. She looked down at Minjun. But if you really want to know him, if you want to learn how to be part of his life, Daniel's breath hitched. Then start by showing up tomorrow. Same time. No suits. No chauffeur. Just you. A shaky smile broke across his face. I'll be here. She glanced up at him with something unreadable in her expression. Not trust yet, but not the cold wall she'd carried for so long either. Good, she said, and as Daniel stood to leave, he looked back one last time at the child now sleeping peacefully in her arms. He had missed the beginning of his son's story. Daniel stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, hesitating. His wardrobe was a museum of tailored suits and expensive shirts, but none of them felt right. They all spoke of boardrooms, dominance, and a life he was slowly peeling away from. After a long pause, he reached for an old sweatshirt tucked at the back of his closet. One Leah had once stolen and worn for weeks. It still smelled faintly of old books and lavender. No car today. He walked, past the buildings he once barely noticed, past the posters of his own face still smiling from an ad campaign he hadn't approved personally. Today, none of it mattered. When he arrived at the cafe, it was still early. The chairs were stacked, the floors freshly mopped. The windows shimmered with the first light of day. Through the glass, he saw her. Yeah. She was setting up the counter, tying her apron with the same quiet grace he had come to memorize. Her hair was tied up, and a small smear of flour rested on her cheek. She hadn't seen him yet. For a moment, he didn't move. He just watched, as if he was afraid the moment would vanish the second he stepped forward. Then she turned, and their eyes met. She didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. She unlocked the door. You came, she said simply, stepping aside to let him in. I said I would. Leah glanced down. Most people say things they don't mean. Daniel's gaze held hers. I meant it. She nodded once, then walked back behind the counter. Minjun sat in a cushioned play area near the back, surrounded by plush toys and soft blocks. When he saw Daniel, he blinked a few times, then let out a tiny, delighted squeal. It was small, but it split something open inside Daniel. Hey, buddy, he whispered, crouching near him. You remember me? The baby reached toward him with chubby hands, babbling nonsense sounds that made Leah look over, her eyes narrowing slightly. Not in warning, in surprise. Daniel sat on the floor, unbothered by his expensive jeans brushing against the tile. Minjun giggled and offered him a green rubber dinosaur. A gift, Daniel asked, smiling. For me. The baby clapped once, then drooled on the toy and handed it over again. Daniel laughed, a sound that surprised even him. Behind the counter, Leah watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But something in her gaze had shifted, just slightly. After a while, she brought over 2 mugs of warm barley tea. She sat across from Daniel at one of the booths, the baby now peacefully gnawing on a corner of a book in his playpen. You really don't know what you're doing, do you? She asked, her tone softer than yesterday. No, Daniel admitted with a sheepish smile. But I want to learn. She sipped her tea in silence. He mirrored her, the warmth of the drink grounding him. Why now? She asked suddenly. Why show up now after all this time? He looked at her for a long moment, eyes full of all the years he couldn't rewind. Because something snapped in me when I saw you holding him, he said slowly. I didn't recognize the man I've become. I have all this power, all this wealth, but for what? I'm admired by strangers and invisible to the people who ever truly mattered. He paused, watching her reaction. I walked into that cafe expecting coffee and quiet, and I found the life I could have had if I hadn't been so afraid to live it. Leah leaned back, her fingers brushing the rim of her mug. I was angry for so long, she said quietly. I hated that you chose ambition over me. But then, I realized, I didn't want to raise a child on resentment. He nodded slowly. You shouldn't have had to raise him alone. I did what I had to, she said simply, and I don't regret a second of it. But I won't lie, it was hard. Lonely. There were nights when he was sick and wouldn't stop crying and I didn't sleep for days. Nights I wished I could call someone. But there was no one. Daniel's throat tightened. I was supposed to be that call. But you weren't, she said. And I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because whatever this is, it's not just about showing up once. It's about showing up always. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. What's that? She asked. He opened it, flipping through pages filled with shaky handwriting. It's a list of things I don't know. About him. About being a father. I wrote down every question that came to mind last night. Leah blinked, caught off guard. Let me see. He handed it to her. She scanned the first few lines. What time does he nap? What's his favorite color? How does he like his food cut? What lullabies does she sing when he cries? Does he like books with flaps? What makes him laugh the hardest? Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page. You're serious, she said. I am, Daniel said. I've made too many decisions in my life by thinking I had forever to fix things later. But I've learned, later is never promised. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. Then start with one question. He smiled nervously. Okay, what's his favorite toy? Leah chuckled softly, wiping a tear before it could fall. A worn-out bunny named Mr. Kimchi. He can't sleep without it. Daniel laughed through a lump in his throat. Mr. Kimchi, I already like him. There was a pause. Next question? She asked. He nodded. What kind of stories does he like? Ones where the hero loses everything and has to rebuild, she said, watching him closely. He always claps when they find their way back. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then I'll keep showing up until the hero finds his way back too. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. And for the first time in years, there was no wall between them. And the day after that, always at the same hour, with his worn notebook in hand and a nervous energy that made him seem younger, less polished. Each visit chipped away a little more of the distance. Each question he asked, about Minjun's habits, his first words, his favorite snack, was like laying down a fragile stone path toward something he'd thought was lost forever. Leah wasn't quick to forgive. She didn't laugh easily around him. But she listened. She watched. And though her walls remained, Daniel could feel something shifting, something almost imperceptible. The way she no longer flinched when he stood close, the way her eyes lingered on him just a second longer each day. On the fourth day, he arrived late. Just 20 minutes. But the delay set off a tremor inside him he hadn't expected. His taxi had stalled in traffic, and with every minute that passed, panic surged. What if she thinks I changed my mind? What if she tells me not to come back? By the time he reached the cafe, slightly breathless, Leah was wiping down a table near the front. Minjun sat in his usual spot on a foam mat, chewing on a wooden giraffe. Leah glanced up, eyes flicking to the clock, then back to Daniel. You're late, she said flatly. I know, he replied, chest still rising and falling. I'm sorry. The traffic. He trailed off when he saw her mouth twitch, just slightly. She wasn't angry. She'd noticed. That was something. He dropped to the floor beside Minjun without hesitation. The baby grinned, reaching for Daniel's hand, and placed the giraffe in his palm like a sacred offering. Daniel laughed softly. Giraffe today, huh? Sorry I'm late, little man. Leah walked over with 2 cups of barley tea. She set them down without a word and sat across from him like she always did. Familiar but still distant. After a few quiet moments, she finally asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" Daniel looked at her, surprised. "I told you why." "No," she said. "You told me you want to be a father. You said you want to learn. But you never answered why." He paused, hands resting on his knees, gaze falling to the sleeping bunny toy Minjun had dragged over beside him. "Because I want him to know me," he said after a moment. "I want him to know more than the story you'll tell him one day. I want him to feel who I am when I walk into a room. I want him to laugh when I do something stupid. I want him to cry for me when I leave. Not because I want him to suffer, but because it would mean I matter." Leah said nothing, but her eyes were softer now, studying him. "And," he added quietly, "because I want to be able to look him in the eyes when he's older and say I tried. That even if I came late, I never left again." There was a long silence. She stirred her tea slowly, gaze distant now. "He cried for hours once," she said suddenly. "After a fever. He was so small. His skin was burning. I didn't know what to do. I held him all night. I sang until I lost my voice. And at one point, I looked at him and I said, 'Please, please stay. You're all I have.'" Daniel's chest clenched. "I didn't call anyone. Not because I was strong," she went on, "but because I didn't have anyone to call. And do you know what I hated most?" He shook his head slowly. "I hated that I still wished it had been you. Even after everything. I still imagined you walking through the door with medicine and blankets. I still believed you'd come." Her voice broke then, just a little. "But you didn't." Daniel reached across the table, not touching her, just letting his fingers rest there, open, waiting. "I'm here now." She didn't move her hand, but she didn't pull away either. Then the baby sneezed, a loud, comical sound that made both of them look down. His face crumpled, unsure if he should laugh or cry. Daniel instinctively picked him up, holding him awkwardly but gently. Minjun blinked at him, and then nestled into his chest. It was the first time. Leah froze, her breath caught, and Daniel, he went completely still, as though if he moved too quickly, the moment might dissolve. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of emotion flooding through him. The weight of his son against his heart. Warm, real, fragile. He whispered, swallowing hard. "I don't know if I'm doing this right." Leah's voice was soft. "You're doing fine." Minjun closed his eyes, his tiny fingers curling into Daniel's collar. And just like that, a silent permission passed between them. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was becoming something more, something real. And though neither of them dared say it aloud, both Daniel and Leah felt it in the stillness that followed. Something had changed. Minjun's warmth still lingered on his chest. The feeling of those small, trusting fingers gripping his shirt hadn't left him. He looked down at his phone, thumb hovering over a photo he'd taken at the cafe. Minjun asleep in his arms, his cheek pressed against Daniel's chest. It was blurry, but perfect. He pressed the phone to his forehead and let out a shaky breath. That moment it had unraveled him. And then, without fully thinking it through, he picked up his coat and left. By the time he reached Leah's apartment, it was late. He hesitated outside the door for several minutes before knocking softly. 3 taps, then silence. He heard footsteps, then the door opened slightly, the chain still on. Leah stood on the other side, surprised, but not entirely unprepared. "It's past 10, she said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry," he said. I couldn't sleep." She looked at him, searching his face. "Is something wrong?" "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice lower now, almost unsteady. She hesitated, then unlatched the chain and opened the door. She wore a soft cotton shirt and loose pants, her hair down, no makeup, just Leah. Real, tired, beautiful in a way that made his throat tighten. "Come in," she said. He stepped inside, immediately struck by the warmth of the small space. Toys were scattered on the rug. A blanket was thrown over the couch. The baby monitor on the table buzzed softly with Minjun's breathing. The scent of chamomile tea and baby powder hung in the air. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, suddenly unsure of himself. I remembered something, he said. Leah tilted her head slightly. That night, the night you told me you were pregnant. I remember the look on your face. She leaned against the armrest of the couch. I remember everything about that night. You were so scared, he continued. But you smiled when you said it, like part of you hoped I would be happy. And I just stood there, frozen. Leah didn't speak. She folded her arms tightly across her chest. I told myself I wasn't ready, he went on. But that's not the truth. The truth is, I was angry. Her eyes widened slightly. Angry? Yes, he said. Not at you, at myself, at how powerless I felt. I'd built this vision of success, of control, and suddenly you told me I was going to be a father, and I realized I didn't know how to be one. I didn't know how to love someone without being afraid they'd need more than I could give. Silence stretched between them. I lied when I said I didn't know, he whispered. I did know you were pregnant. I just didn't let myself believe it. Leah's voice came out quietly. What are you saying? He swallowed hard. I overheard you one night on the phone, talking to your friend. I heard you say you were going to take the test. I should have waited, should have asked. But instead I buried myself in work, in meetings, in numbers. Leah's lips parted slightly, eyes narrowing. So all this time, I told myself if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me, he said. And when you didn't, I pretended it wasn't real. A beat passed, then another. I needed to tell you that, he said, stepping closer. Because I want to be honest now. I don't want you to think I was completely in the dark. I just didn't have the courage. Leah stared at him for a long time. You didn't just walk away, she said. You chose to disappear. Yes, Daniel whispered, voice thick. I chose wrong. Leah walked to the window, looking out into the quiet night. He used to wake up crying, she said, every hour. And I'd sit right there. She pointed to the worn armchair by the wall. And I'd rock him until my arms went numb. I'd sing to him and pray to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. And every single time, I hoped you'd knock on the door. Daniel closed his eyes, pain rising in his chest like a tide. But you didn't, she said. Not once. I know, he murmured. And I'm so sorry. She turned to face him. I spent so many nights trying to forgive you in my head, telling myself you weren't evil, just scared. But fear doesn't erase damage. Her voice cracked. It doesn't erase the memories of holding his tiny body and wondering if I was enough. Daniel stepped forward, slowly, like he was approaching something sacred. You were, he said. You are. You always have been. She looked at him, tears brimming now. But where does that leave us, Daniel? Do you expect me to just hand over a piece of my heart? Our son? Like it costs nothing? No, he said. I don't want to take anything from you. I want to build something with you, even if it takes time, even if it's slow and fragile. I want to earn the right to be in your life again. She let the words hang in the air. Then, finally, she walked past him, toward a small drawer. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. What's this? He asked. The lullaby I sing to him every night. If you want to try putting him to sleep sometime, you'll need this. Daniel stared at the page, then back at her. I can't promise it'll sound good, he said, voice trembling with the smallest hint of laughter through his emotion. Leah gave him a long look. Her voice was soft. He doesn't care about perfect. He just wants to feel safe. Daniel nodded slowly, reverently, like she had handed him a key to something priceless. He folded the paper carefully and placed it over his heart. Then I'll spend every day learning how to be that. And in the soft hum of the baby monitor, through the crackle of city lights outside, Daniel felt the quiet shift again. This wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opening. He stared at the ceiling for a long while, remembering the way Leah had looked at him the night before, the vulnerability in her voice, the fear laced with something else. Not quite forgiveness. Not yet, but no longer rejection either. Something had changed. He was starting to matter. Later that afternoon, with his sleeves rolled up and his hair messily tousled from the wind, Daniel made his way toward the house he once feared approaching, Leah's parents' home. This wasn't a plan he'd made lightly. It had kept him up the night before. But something had shifted in him ever since he held Minjun. There was no more time for waiting. He needed to face the shadows that still lived in the corners of his past. The ones he'd buried under board meetings and power plays. He knocked. The door opened after a pause. Her father stood in the frame. Older than Daniel remembered. Hair thinned, shoulders heavier. He blinked at him once, recognition dawning slowly. His expression didn't harden immediately, but it didn't soften either. "Mr. Han," Daniel said gently, bowing his head slightly. "I was hoping I could speak with you and your wife, if it's not too much." Mr. Han didn't move for a long moment. Then finally, with a sigh like he was lifting the weight of 3 years, he opened the door wider. Inside, the house smelled of ginger tea and old wood. Photos still hung on the wall, including one of Leah in her graduation gown. Daniel's eyes lingered on it for a moment. She had looked so hopeful. Leah's mother emerged from the kitchen. When she saw him, her hands paused mid-wipe on a ceramic bowl. She said nothing. "I came," Daniel began, "because I need you both to know the truth, and because I owe you more than silence." Mr. Han gestured toward the living room. They all sat, 3 people, and years of unspoken grief between them. "I was angry with you," Mrs. Han said at last. "We all were." "I understand," Daniel replied. "She came back to us broken," she continued, voice shaking. "Pregnant, abandoned, and still trying to defend you." Daniel blinked quickly, his throat tightening. "I didn't know she came here. She told us not to call you," Mr. Han said, his eyes steady now. "Said if you wanted to be part of it, you would have stayed. So we watched her raise that child alone, with grace and pain, and without complaint." "I failed her," Daniel said, his voice low. "There's no excuse. I made the worst decision of my life thinking I was protecting us both from something I didn't know how to handle. But I know now. I walked away from the best thing I ever had." There was silence. Then he stood up. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued, voice trembling. "I'm asking for your trust to try, to show her and your grandson that I'm not the same man who left, that I can be better, that I will be better." Mrs. Han's hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked at him for a long time. Then finally, quietly, she spoke. "Do you love her?" Daniel didn't blink. "Yes, I never stopped." "Then don't say it with flowers or gifts," she said. "Say it by being there the next time he gets a fever. Say it by waking up early to help her wash bottles. Say it by putting away your pride every single time she doubts you." "I will," he said. "You have my word." She nodded, just once. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "You should go," Mr. Han said, standing slowly. "Let us sit with this." Daniel bowed deeply. "Thank you for listening." As he stepped out onto the street, something heavy lifted from his chest. Not completely, but enough to breathe a little deeper. But the relief didn't last, because just as he reached the end of the block, his phone vibrated. It was Leah. His heart jumped as he answered. "Hey, I was just going to..." Her voice cut through, urgent. "Daniel, where are you?" "I'm just leaving your parents' place. Come to the cafe. Right now. Please." He froze. Her voice wasn't just urgent. It was shaking. "Leah, what happened?" There was a pause. Then her voice cracked. "It's Minjun. He's burning up again." Daniel's blood turned cold. "I'm on my way." He ran. Through streets and crowds, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. His lungs burned, his legs trembled, but he didn't stop. Not this time. He wouldn't be too late again. When he burst through the cafe doors, he found her sitting on the floor behind the counter. Minjun wrapped in a blanket against her chest, sweat on his tiny forehead, his skin pale. Daniel dropped to his knees. "I don't know what to do," Leah choked, pressing the baby close. "It's happening again, and he won't stop crying." "Give him to me," Daniel said, reaching out. She hesitated for only a second. Then she handed him over. Daniel cradled Minjun, rocking gently, whispering the softest sounds into his ear. And then, with trembling hands, he pulled out the paper. He sang. The lullaby, off-key, broken, but full of love. Minjun whimpered. Then slowly, gradually, the crying softened. His breathing slowed. His little fists unclenched. Lia sat back against the wall, staring in disbelief. You remembered the tune, she whispered. Daniel held his son tighter. I remembered everything that matters. And in that moment, Lia looked at him, truly looked, and saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see in years. Lia sat just a few feet away, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them as if she were trying to hold herself together. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Daniel looked down at the child sleeping in his arms and felt something like reverence. This tiny life that had no idea how close he'd come to not existing in his father's world. How easy it had been for Daniel to almost miss it all. Now he couldn't imagine breathing without this weight on his chest. I was so scared, Lia said, breaking the silence, her voice hoarse. It felt like before. The way his body burned. The way he wouldn't stop crying. I couldn't do it alone again, Daniel. Not again. Daniel looked up. Her face was pale, eyes red, but she was no longer hiding the fear. You didn't have to, he said. Not this time. She gave a hollow laugh. But I didn't know. I didn't know if you'd come. Part of me still thought you might vanish again. Daniel didn't respond right away. He shifted Minjun gently, securing him against his chest, then looked at her, deeply, fully. I understand why you don't trust me, he said. I've given you every reason not to, but when you called, I didn't even think. I just ran. I would have torn through the city if I had to. She nodded slowly. You did. A silence stretched between them again, but it was different now. Not full of tension, but something else. Wounds trying to close. I think I wanted to hate you, she said quietly, for what you missed, for what I had to become without you. Daniel didn't flinch. I deserve that. But now I don't know what I feel, she continued, her voice cracking again. Because when I saw you holding him, when I heard you singing to him, even off-key, something broke in me. Or maybe something healed. I don't know. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He's everything I never knew I needed. And every moment I've missed with him haunts me. But I don't want guilt to be the only thing that connects us. I want to be his father because I love him. Not because I feel sorry. You didn't have to be perfect tonight, Lia whispered. You just had to come. And you did. He gave her a soft, trembling smile. I'll keep coming. Every time. For him. For you. Lia looked at him, eyes full of 1,000 unsaid things. Regret. Pain. Hope. Then, slowly, she moved toward him. She knelt beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Her eyes never left Minjun's peaceful face. He looks just like you, she said, especially when he sleeps. Daniel swallowed a thick wave of emotion. I never realized how much I could love someone so small. You learn, she said, her voice a hush. You stumble and you break, and you panic, and you keep going. Daniel looked down at Minjun, brushing a loose strand of hair from his tiny forehead. I don't want to miss another second. Lia let her head rest gently against Daniel's shoulder. I can't promise I'll forgive you overnight, she said. I don't know if I'm ready to open that door completely. He nodded. You don't have to. Just leave it unlocked. I'll knock every day. They sat like that for a long time. Two people with broken pasts, sharing the same fragile present, unsure of the future but breathing the same moment. The city hummed outside. The world kept spinning. Daniel showed up at the cafe every morning. He no longer wore the layers of tailored identity he once clung to. No crisp suits. No watch that cost more than most people's rent. Just simple clothes, rolled sleeves, and eyes that carried a soft urgency. Like a man trying to rewrite his past one gesture at a time. He learned to hold Minjun with more ease. He learned the rhythm of his favorite storybooks, the way he kicked when he was hungry, how he clapped when he saw birds through the cafe window. And he learned to listen, not just to the baby's sounds, but to Leah's silences. It was on the 7th morning that something changed. Leah was behind the counter drying mugs. Minjun sat on the floor with Daniel, both of them surrounded by toy blocks. Daniel was building a lopsided castle. Minjun kept knocking it over and squealing in delight. "Your son's a demolition expert," Daniel said, laughing as the last block tumbled down again. "He gets it from me," Leah said over her shoulder. Daniel smiled. "I believe that." He leaned back against the wall, Minjun crawling into his lap. The baby rested his cheek against Daniel's chest, hands gripping the fabric of his shirt. Daniel held him close, instinctive now, no longer hesitant. The feeling never grew old, like touching something precious you never thought you'd be allowed to hold. Leah watched from the counter. For a while, she said nothing. Then, without warning, she spoke. "I told him once," she said softly, "that his father was someone far away, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to stay." Daniel looked up, heart tightening. "I didn't want him to grow up thinking he wasn't wanted," she continued, "but I also couldn't lie. So I gave him the most merciful version of you that I could find." Daniel's voice was low. "Did he understand?" "He's too young to know what father really means yet," she said. "But he knows your face now. When you walk in, he smiles. He lifts his arms." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "That means something," she added, eyes locking with his. "And I need to know you understand what that means." "I do," he said. "I do." Leah moved from behind the counter and sat down on the floor across from them. "He'll grow up fast," she said. "Soon he'll start asking questions. About why you weren't there in his baby pictures. About why his friends' dads came to school plays, and he didn't see yours until later." Daniel lowered his eyes. "And what do I say when he asks?" "You tell him the truth," Leah said firmly. "You tell him you made a mistake. You were scared. You ran. But you came back." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll never lie to him," he said. "And I'll never leave again." She studied his face. "Say that again." He met her gaze, steady now. "I will never leave him again." A long pause. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "Do you know how many nights I wished for that?" she whispered. "Not even for me, just for him. For someone to say, 'I'm here now and I'm staying.'" Daniel looked down at Minjun, who was softly snoring now, curled like a question mark in his arms. "I can't change the beginning of his story," Daniel said, "but I can show him how it continues." Leah drew her knees to her chest, resting her chin there. She was quiet for a long time. "You're good with him," she said finally. He smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like effort. It just happens." "That's how it's supposed to feel," she murmured. The baby stirred in his arms. Daniel shifted carefully, cradling him tighter. "You're tired," he said, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. "Let me take him, just for a few hours. Let me watch him so you can rest." Leah blinked, startled. "You mean, on your own?" He nodded. "I want to try." Her breath caught. "What if he cries and won't stop? What if you panic?" "Then I'll call you," he said. "But I'll still try, because you've done this alone for years. And I need to know what it's like, the good and the hard." She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "I won't take him far," he said gently. "We'll just go to the park. Maybe sit under a tree. I'll sing to him if he gets fussy. Badly. But I'll sing." She let out a soft, surprised laugh. Then her smile faded into something more vulnerable. "Okay," she whispered. "But call me. Every hour." "I will," he promised. She reached out and touched the edge of the baby blanket. Her fingers lingered there, brushing against Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, standing carefully with Minjun in his arms. The child barely stirred. "I'll bring him back safe," Daniel said. "I know." And as he stepped out of the cafe, the soft morning sun warming his face, Minjun nestled against his chest, Daniel felt something shift again. Something deeper than hope. Daniel sat on a bench beneath a wide, leafy oak with Minjun tucked into his arms, snug in a blanket Leah had wrapped around him just before they left the cafe. The baby's head rested on his chest, his tiny hands tangled in the fabric of Daniel's sweater, eyes fluttering from the rhythm of the wind. For a while, Daniel didn't move. He was too afraid the moment might slip away if he breathed too loudly. Around him, life moved in soft ripples. A jogger passing by, a mother pushing a stroller, a couple laughing over coffee on the next bench. And here he was, a man who once thought love could wait, holding the very reason it never should have. He looked down at Minjun and spoke, voice low and trembling. "Hey, buddy, I'm still figuring this out." The baby blinked up at him sleepily. "I don't know the songs. I don't know how to change a diaper properly without almost gluing it to myself." He chuckled softly. "But I know this. I love you, and I won't leave again." He pulled out his phone to check the time. Almost an hour had passed. He thought about calling Leah, but something stopped him. He wanted to bring back more than reassurance this time. He wanted to bring her proof. So he reached for the folded paper in his pocket, the lullaby, and began to hum it under his breath, eyes fixed on the child in his arms. His voice cracked at times, unsure, but steady. And Minjun, as if sensing something warm and familiar, relaxed against him. It was the first time Daniel felt like a father without the fear behind it. Then his phone vibrated. He looked. A known number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello." A woman's voice, sweet but sharp, calculated. Well, if it isn't the ghost from my past." Daniel froze. "Who is this? You sound tense. Still pretending you don't remember your ex-fiancé." He closed his eyes slowly. "Sujin." "Bingo." She laughed softly. "I saw you in the news recently. One of those puff pieces. CEO turned doting father? I have to say, Daniel, you're good at rebranding. Almost believable. What do you want?" She sighed. "Now, is that any way to greet someone who once nearly wore your last name? That was a lifetime ago. And yet, here I am, back in town, with an offer." He looked around the park, heartbeat rising. Minjun shifted in his arms. "I'm not interested. You haven't even heard it," she said, her voice slipping into something more playful and dangerous. "A new investment deal. Overseas. Big stakes. The kind of opportunity you used to kill for. I'm not that man anymore." "Oh, please," she said with a mocking laugh. "Don't act like you're suddenly father of the year just because you're babysitting in a park." He stood slowly, cradling Minjun tighter. "I'm raising my son," he said firmly. "Not babysitting. Right?" she said with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Well, let me know how long that lasts once you start missing the boardroom, the power, the version of you that actually mattered." "I don't need any of that anymore." She paused. "Is this about her?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't bring Leah into this. I always knew you had a soft spot for broken girls," Sujin said coldly. "But don't forget, Daniel, I still know things about you, things you've kept buried." "I'm not afraid of you," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed something deeper. "Good," she replied. "Then you won't mind when I drop by the cafe tomorrow, just to say hi." He was silent. "I'm sure Leah would love to meet the woman you left her for." The call ended. Daniel stood there for a moment, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Minjun stirred again, sensing the tension. Daniel pressed a kiss to his son's forehead, closing his eyes. "No one's taking this from me," he whispered. "No one." He called Leah immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he said, then paused. "But I need to tell you something, before someone else does." He heard her inhale sharply. "What is it?" "There's someone from my past. Someone who might come by the cafe tomorrow. Her name is Sujin. She was part of my life during the worst of it." Leah didn't say anything. "She's not a threat," Daniel continued. "But I won't lie to you. She's manipulative. And she knows how to twist everything. Why would she come now? To remind me of who I used to be. To pull me back." Silence. I wanted you to hear it from me, he said softly, because I'm not that man anymore. And I don't want to keep anything from you, not anymore. He could hear her breathing, steady and deep. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. And if she comes, I'll know who I'm looking at. I'll be there, Daniel promised. I'm not letting her near you or our son. She already had the version of you who walked away, Leah said, her voice calm but resolute. Let's see how she handles the one who stayed. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. I'll be home soon, he whispered, with our son. Okay, she said softly. We'll be waiting. And as Daniel looked down at Minjun, sleeping peacefully in his arms despite the shadow now creeping toward their lives, he realized something fierce and clear. This was his family, and he would fight for them. Daniel stood outside the cafe with Minjun strapped to his chest, asleep in the baby carrier. The street was calm, the city only beginning to stir, but his chest was tight, like something unseen was already watching from the shadows. He glanced at the small bell hanging above the cafe's glass door before pushing it open. Leah stood behind the counter, wiping it down with slow, distracted movements. Her eyes lifted as he entered, and they met his. A moment of silence passed between them. Not awkward, but full. He's still asleep, Daniel said softly, patting Minjun's back gently. Leah stepped out from behind the counter. She reached toward the baby and pressed her lips to his forehead, her hand lingering. How was the rest of yesterday? She asked. Daniel exhaled. Perfect. Right up until the phone call. She nodded. You did the right thing. Telling me. I meant it. I won't let her get between this, he said, his eyes locked on hers. Whatever this is becoming, it matters. A gust of wind brushed against the door. Daniel turned slightly. Then the bell rang. She stepped in like she owned the room. Tall, striking, dressed in cream and black, with a sleek coat and sunglasses too large for the soft light of morning. Her heels tapped against the wood floor like a countdown. Sujin. Leah's body tensed beside him, but she didn't move. Daniel stood still, grounding himself, one hand protectively cupped over Minjun's back. Wow, Sujin said, removing her sunglasses with a dramatic slowness. This place is quaint. Sujin, Daniel said calmly. You said your piece yesterday. You didn't need to come here. I'm just curious, she replied, scanning the cafe with polite disapproval. You used to take meetings in penthouses and private clubs. Now you're babysitting in coffee shops. That's quite the fall. Leah took a step forward, her voice even. We serve customers here, not ghosts. Sujin turned to her with a tight smile. You must be Leah, the woman who inspired Daniel's early retirement. Leah didn't blink. And you must be the woman who taught him what not to want. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, a flash of pride behind his shock. Sujin laughed, but there was a sharp edge to it. He's changed, hasn't he? That's what you're hoping? That this man, who once disappeared into boardrooms and forgot birthdays, suddenly woke up and became a father overnight. Daniel stepped in. Stop. Sujin raised an eyebrow. You think love makes him different? It already has, Leah answered for him. Sujin tilted her head. You really believe that? Because I remember the Daniel who promised me an empire. The one who said family was a weakness. Daniel flinched. Leah looked at him, waiting. His voice was low, steady. That version of me died the day I walked into this cafe and saw what I lost. He took a step closer to Sujin, shielding Leah and the child behind him. I thought building an empire would fix the broken things inside me, but all it did was make me feel more empty. I had everything except a soul. Sujin's smile faltered. And now, he continued, I'm holding the only thing that ever gave me one back. Minjun stirred against him, letting out a sleepy whimper. Daniel instinctively rocked him gently, humming a soft note from the lullaby. Sujin blinked, unsure now. Something in her expression cracked, just barely. I didn't come to fight you, she said more quietly. I came to remind you of who you were. Daniel met her eyes. I know who I was, and I'll spend every day proving to him I'm not that man anymore. She looked at Leah again, studied her. He'll disappoint you eventually. Leah's reply was quiet, but it struck with force. Maybe, but at least he's here. You can't ruin what he's rebuilding. Sujin's mask slipped for a moment. Her jaw tightened, her eyes cooled. I guess I underestimated how much he's changed. You didn't underestimate him, Leah said. You just never really saw him. The silence that followed was heavy. Sujin slowly put her sunglasses back on. She didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked out, her heels echoing down the street. The door shut behind her. Leah stood still, arms crossed. Her breathing was shaky, but her eyes stayed clear. Daniel turned to her, his voice trembling. Thank you for standing with me. She looked at him for a long moment. I wasn't standing with you, she said. His heart sank. She stepped closer. I was standing for you, because today, you showed me something I've never seen before. What? He asked, afraid to hope. You fought for us, not with words, with who you are now. He exhaled, relief trembling in his shoulders. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, Leah said softly, but if you keep showing up like this, I'll keep opening the door. Daniel nodded, blinking back tears. I'll knock every morning. She reached up, gently touched Minjun's back, and looked into Daniel's eyes. Then come home with us tonight. Daniel swallowed hard, voice cracking. I'd love that. And this time, when he followed her out the door, it wasn't as a visitor, or a stranger trying to make up for lost time. Leah held the door open with one hand, while the other cradled a grocery bag against her side. Daniel stepped in behind her, Minjun resting against his shoulder in his carrier, already half asleep again. It was strange, the way everything felt both new and familiar. The scent of rice and chamomile lingering in the air. The toys scattered across the floor. The little notes stuck to the fridge reminding Leah of pediatric appointments and formula measurements. He hadn't lived here. He'd never been in this space. But somehow it felt like home. Not the kind of home built with money, but the kind you return to when you've lost everything else. Leah kicked her shoes off and set the bag on the counter. You can lay him on the couch for a minute, she said quietly. I'll warm a bottle just in case he wakes up hungry. Daniel nodded and gently loosened the straps of the carrier, sliding Minjun into his arms. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open for a moment before settling again into sleep. Daniel eased him onto the soft couch cushions, adjusting the blanket around him with slow, careful movements. Leah turned from the kitchen and watched for a second. You've gotten better at that. He glanced over. I still panic every time he makes a sound. It's like holding the world and praying not to break it. She smiled faintly. That's exactly what it feels like. A quiet moment passed. The microwave hummed behind her, the light casting a soft glow across her face. Then Daniel spoke, more serious this time. Leah, can I ask you something? She turned off the microwave and set the bottle on the counter. You can ask. He stepped closer, his voice lower now. What was the hardest moment? After I left. Her hands froze over the countertop. She didn't answer right away. Her breath caught. Daniel watched her carefully. You don't have to tell me if... It was the night I gave birth, she said suddenly, almost too fast, like the words had been waiting for release. I was alone, in that hospital room, surrounded by strangers. No one to hold my hand. No one to tell me I was doing okay. Daniel's throat closed. They asked me if the father was coming. I said no. Her eyes shimmered. And when Minjun finally arrived, I cried, and not because I was in pain, but because I was so afraid he'd feel that emptiness. Even then, that he'd know he was coming into a world where the first man who should have loved him wasn't there. She turned to face him fully. That's what you missed, Daniel. Not just the milestones. Not just the first words or first steps. You missed the most vulnerable moment of my life, and I didn't know how to forgive that for a long time. He stepped closer, heart pounding, his voice raw. I can't go back to that room. I can't stand beside you in that moment. But I can stand beside you now, and every moment after this. I want to be the man you can lean on when the world gets heavy. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. You don't get to rewrite the past, she said gently. But maybe you can help write what comes next. His voice shook. That's all I want. They stood like that for a while. Two people no longer running, no longer hiding from the grief they had buried between them. Then a soft cry pierced the silence. Minjun. Daniel moved first, instinctively. He crossed the room and lifted the baby into his arms, holding him against his chest. Hey, buddy. I'm here, he whispered. Daddy's here. Lia watched him, something breaking in her expression. Her arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't crying, but something deep within her was trembling, melting. Daniel sat down with the baby, gently rocking him. He glanced up. You should rest. I can take the first shift. Lia let out a small, disbelieving laugh. First shift. He smiled. Isn't that how real parents do it? She stepped closer, slowly, and sat beside him.